For more discussion, joining us by Xiao Geng, Associate Dean from the Chinese University of Hong Kong in Shenzhen, and Chen Jiahe, Chief Investment Officer at NOMRK Technologies. Welcome to both of you. Now, Mr. Chen, you are coming from a private company in China, in fact, the second generation. And Professor Xiao, I understand that you have been working with private entrepreneurs in China for decades. So I guess I'm talking to the right people. Mr. Chen, what is your take of the upcoming draft private economy promotion law?
Well, that's something that really encourages people like us, we manage private companies. In the past, China has been given quite a lot of support to private companies. And you can see government keep on setting out policies to support the private companies. If you read through the documents in the past few years, you see, tens of these documents supporting the private economy, private companies, these kind of things. And the financial institution has also set up quite many rules and policies aiming at supporting the private companies, which is currently a very significant part in China's economy. But we haven't saw a law yet. So everything is, policies, papers, everything. But there hasn't been an official law stating that we are supporting the private companies. So be confident. But this time there is a law. So, this kind of degree is more significant than just sending out policies and papers. So this law would bring more confidence to private entrepreneurs in China.
Of course, devils are in the details. We do not know all the details yet as we speak. It will come out only later. Professor Xiao, what is your take?
The economy is actually not very good right now and is at the turning point. And usually private companies are very difficult, when the macroeconomy are not good. So at this point, I think it's important for the government to spend extra effort to, encourage the development of private economy. So the law, in a way, is very timely. Yeah.
But of course, once a law becomes a law, it will stay there, hopefully, for an extended period of time so that everybody feels the predictability and stability. So, Mr. Chen, from private business perspective, what do you think are some of the most important areas that this law should cover and can cover?
Well, when we look at the areas this law will cover, it will state from the very beginning that China's private companies is critical to the economy and to the country. So that's one thing. And it will mainly focus on giving the support to private companies. Because if you look at the Chinese economy, there are quite many private companies employing a much larger amount of people and producing a much larger amount of GDP. But most of the private economies and private companies are actually smaller when compared with state-owned companies. And you see a few state-owned companies who are really, really large. So when these companies actually competing against each other, the large companies in many cases would have their advantages. I mean, in many cases, this is not related with whether this company is a privately owned or state-owned, but that's because the state-owned companies are really large. So they get a lot of support from financial institutions. Meanwhile, because they are state-owned, and sometimes local governments would give them more support because, they are working together in some cases. So this law would definitely give more support to private companies. And this support would come from many details. For example, the financial support, the support of the local governments, the local police force, local law enforcement institutions, local courts, all these kind of institutions. So basically, it's about supporting the private companies, I would say.
But on the other hand, people would ask, Mr. Chen, for those who do not necessarily know China's past, especially as to how this political system is related to different kind of ownership, why do you need a specific law for the private sector? Why don't just have a law that's applicable and equally applied to everybody?
That's a very good question. Actually, we got many laws. I mean, the business law, the company law, these kind of practical laws. Every law is stating the same for the private companies and state-owned companies. We actually don't separate the private companies and saying this can only be done by the state-owned company, and that can only be done by the private company. We don't have legislation like this. So most of the laws in China, I would say actually all laws in China, actually supporting both kinds of companies. But because the private companies, in some cases, when they're competing against the state-owned companies, they are in the weak position when they're doing this competition with state-owned companies. I mean, go out and ask the students, university graduates, and ask them, with the same kind of pay, same kind of employment conditions, same industry, would you go to a state-owned company or would you go to a private-owned company? In about 90% of the cases, you get the answer saying that, okay, everything's the same, then I'm going to the state-owned company. So that's a fact. So this law is actually providing more support to private companies because everybody believes state-owned companies is protected. So this law is kind of leaning to the private companies and giving them more support over here.
All right. Professor Xiao, why do you think such a law crucial? What this law need to cover in order to make sure its goal can be served?
Well, ideally, we do not need different laws for different ownership. But considering the history of China, the local government are very, very strong. So in a way, this law for private economy is an extra effort to correct the kind of old tendency. So in a way, to give extra support to the private company, which without this extra support, in fact, private companies are discriminated against in reality. So I think this is a very practical compromise.
Now you are based in Shenzhen, Professor Xiao. One could argue it is one of the important birthplaces of private companies, especially larger and booming ones in China, starting from the early days of China's reform and opening up. Maybe you can help us, together with Mr. Chen, to understand better about what is the current stage of development of Chinese private businesses vis-a-vis, let's say, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, as reform and opening up already been with China for almost 40 years?
Well, I think the private company today is still very strong and very innovative. And if you look at the top companies in China, you can name like Huawei, Tencent, Dajiang. All these are private companies. So there's no doubt private companies is getting really competitive, including the new electrical vehicle companies. Most of them are private. The strong ones are private. So in the sense that the private sector is already the core of the Chinese economy. However, looking around the Shenzhen, a lot of manufacturing companies are hit very hard by recent slowdown of the Chinese economy and also the volatility in the global market. So in terms of employment and profit, actually hit pretty hard. And that is causing some of the problems, which social problems, and also worry about the protection of property rights, particularly when the local government facing with very tight physical constraint. They tend to ask for private company to contribute extra money to support the local economy. And that kind of practice is putting very big pressure on the private economy. And I think the central government want to somehow correct that kind of short-term challenge problems. So that's why I think it's very timely to ensure, even on the serious challenges, the private economy, private company, private entrepreneurs are protected.
Right. How would you, Mr. Chen, characterize the current generation and also the the overall environment they're facing?
Well, when we talk about private companies, I've been knowing quite many private companies. I keep on looking at listed companies and their histories throughout the 1980s, 1990s. I read some of the historical books of these private companies, and what you can see is that it is the private companies that has been given so huge support to China's economic reform that without private companies, the growth of them, we wouldn't have this economic miracle that lasted for almost 5 decades. And if you look at the current status of China's private companies compared with like 20 or 30 years ago, we have actually changed significantly. I mean, if you look at like 30 years ago, we were just joining the global economy, and the products of many Chinese private companies are not really competitive in the global market. We just do some little jobs for the matured economies, matured companies, and we do some outsourcing jobs for them. And we kept on learning, and our private companies kept on investing. We're investing into our technologies, into the working procedure, and everything accumulates. I mean, if you look at nowadays, I mean, compared with 10 or 20 or 30 years ago, China's private companies are becoming the tier 1 companies in the world. The products of many Chinese companies, for example, BYD, which is producing the new energy vehicles, their product is actually beating many competitors in the global market. That's unthinkable back 30 years ago. And companies like Media, they produce a lot of home appliances and selling that to the world. The quality is now really reliable. The quality of Chinese cars is now comparable to Japanese cars, which back 30 years ago, that was unthinkable. And if you look at technology companies, because of the large consumption market that China is having, the technology companies in China like Tencent, Alibaba, JD.com, these companies have become the largest companies in the world. And these are all private companies. So if you look at these private companies, they're actually the history of China's economic growth in the past 4 decades and a half. And their success actually has formed the success of the Chinese economy.
We are looking forward to follow up on the private economy promotion law to see what are the details in it, and looking forward to our future discussions. For now, I want to thank both of you, Chen Jiahua and Xiaogeng. Appreciate it. Thank you so much, gentlemen.